The pines bent low, their black branches groaning under winter's weight, and the wagon wheels sank deep into the mud of the mountain track. Clara Mae Dalton sat in the back, her shawl drawn tight, though the wind slid beneath it like knives. Her kin said nothing to her. None dared look her in the eye, as if shame were a sickness caught by meeting her gaze. Only when the wagon lurched to a stop before the lone cabin did her brother finally speak. His words were stones thrown into the silence. "You'll stay here. He'll take you in. He don't mind ruin things." Clara's hands twisted in her lap. She wanted to ask if they meant to come back, if this was punishment or burial, but she knew the answers already. The pines whispered them. No return, no forgiveness, no place among the Daltons again. The cabin door opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a buffalo coat that smelled of smoke and old storms. His beard was heavy, his hair long and tangled. Scars crawled up the side of his throat, half hidden beneath wool. He did not speak. He simply watched. "This here's Elias Boone," her kin announced, as though delivering livestock. "Mountain man. Don't ask after him." Then, without blessing or farewell, they flicked the reins. The wagon lurched forward, wheels grinding against frozen ruts. Clara's heart stumbled with it. She turned, craning for one last glimpse, but all she saw were shoulders hunched against judgment, faces turned away. And then only snow. She stood trembling in the silence. Elias Boone's eyes, gray as ash, unreadable, studied her for a long breath. Then he lifted her bundle from the mud and jerked his head toward the door. A gesture, not an invitation. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine pitch and iron. Smoke hung in the rafters. A fire burned low in the stone hearth, but the chill clung stubborn to the corners. Clara's boots stuck against the plank floor, damp with meltwater and years of solitude. Elias set her bundle by the wall, then moved past her with slow, deliberate steps. He crouched by the hearth, stirred the coals, added wood. Sparks leapt, golden fireflies against the dim. Still, he said nothing. Clara remained standing, hands knotted in her shawl. Pride begged her to lift her chin, to show no crack, but grief dragged at her bones. She was 23 years old and already cast out as though she'd lived a lifetime of sin. Jedediah Cross's voice haunted her even here, his bitter words the night he'd turned away, branding her unworthy. "Sit," Elias said at last, his voice a gravel road and used by speech. She sat. He ladled stew from a blackened pot and set it before her. The spoon clinked against the tin bowl. Steam curled upward, carrying scents of venison and sage. She swallowed, though her throat ached too tight to eat. Elias did not press her. He ate in silence, his broad shoulders hunched, eyes lowered to the fire. The only sounds were the pop of resin in the flames and the whistle of wind against the chinks in the cabin wall. Shame swelled in her, hot and choking. To be abandoned was one thing. To be given like cast-off cloth to a stranger, this was worse. She wanted to fling the bowl aside, to shout that she was not broken, not ruined. But the words froze in her chest. Elias finished his stew, wiped the spoon on his sleeve, and set it aside. He rose, pulled a blanket from the bed in the corner, and laid it on the chair near the hearth. Then he brought stones from the hearth, wrapped them in burlap, and placed them at her feet. Warmth seeped up through the soles of her boots, unexpected, almost tender. When she did not move, he crouched again and showed her with a nod how to pull the blanket close, how to hold the warmed stones against her skirt. His hands, rough as tree bark, brushed hers only for a second, but the gentleness startled her. For the first time that day, Clara looked fully at him. His face was weathered, lines etched deep by wind and solitude. Yet behind the ash-gray eyes, there was no mockery, no judgment. Only quiet endurance, like the pines that bore each storm without complaint. She whispered, almost to herself, "Why would you let them leave me here?" Elias did not answer. He stoked the fire higher instead, sending sparks up into the shadows. His silence was not cruelty, it was armor. She sensed it then. He bore his own exile, one not given but chosen. Clara pulled the blanket close. The warmth seeped deeper, loosening her stiff bones. For the first time since the wagon left, she allowed her body to rest. Yet her mind spun with questions about him, about herself, about what it meant to be discarded and still breathing. The wind outside howled. Snow thickened against the shutter. The world had closed its door on her, but inside this cabin, firelight spread its glow across rough-hewn walls. She closed her eyes for a moment and listened, not to her family's scorn, not to Jedediah's cruel laughter, but to the steady crackle of the hearth, the scrape of Elias Boone's chair against the floor as he settled into his silence. The world had abandoned her, but the mountain man had not, and that, though small, was the first mercy. Morning came pale and gray, the kind that makes the mountains look like tired giants bowing their heads. Clara woke beneath the blanket Elias had laid over her in the night. The fire had burned down to coals, glowing like half-buried rubies. The cabin was empty. She sat up, listening. The world outside breathed with the faint groan of pines in the wind. Somewhere distant, the report of an axe echoed once, then silence again. He was gone into the trees, leaving her in the hush of his home. Her fingers brushed the rough wood of the table, the iron pot in the hearth, the patched coat thrown over the chair. Traces of him everywhere, quiet, utilitarian, enduring. A man stitched to the wilderness as though he had no other kin. She tried not to think of her own kin, tried not to see her mother's cold eyes or Jedediah's sneer. Still, shame rose like bile. To be left here, exiled into silence, it was worse than death. At least death ended whispers. When Elias returned, the noon sun slanting behind him, he carried 2 rabbits slung over his shoulder and a bundle of pine branches. Snow glittered in his beard. He nodded once, as if greeting required no words, then set about skinning the rabbits on the block outside. Clara watched from the doorway. The efficiency of his hands startled her, the surety of motion, the lack of hesitation. He lived as if the wilderness were his language, and he spoke it fluently. Inside, she found flour and salt in a tin, the makings of bread. Her pride stiffened her spine. If she must live here, she would not be idle. She mixed water into the flour, kneading until her arms trembled, the dough sticky against her palms. When Elias came back in, she had it rising near the fire. He paused, eyes falling on her work. No words, just a flicker of something in his expression, surprise, perhaps gratitude. Then he returned to his silence, hanging the rabbits to roast. The smell of bread mingled with meat, smoke curling rich and heavy. That evening they ate together, neither speaking much, but the silence was different now. Not judgment, not exile, more like the stillness of snow when it falls, soft, sheltering. Days gathered themselves into a rhythm. Elias left each morning with traps and rifle. Clara kept the hearth alive, tended bread, mended seams. The cabin grew less a cage, more a place where her hands mattered. Yet pride was a restless thing. One afternoon, she tried to fetch water herself, refusing to wait for him. The path to the creek was slick with ice, and halfway down she slipped. The bucket clattered, spilling snow, and she landed hard on her knees. Pain bit through her, sharper than the cold. Elias was there suddenly, as if the trees had warned him. His hands grasped her shoulders, steadying her. She flinched, yanking away. "I can do it," she gasped, her voice cracked with fury at her own weakness. His eyes held hers for a long, waited moment. Then he nodded once, stepping back, letting her gather herself. No scorn, no pity, only respect. That night, she boiled the creek water he had carried after all. Her hands shook as she laid the tin mugs before him. "I'm not useless," she whispered, almost too low to hear. He lifted his gaze to hers, steady and quiet. "Never said you were." The words, plain as bread, struck deeper than any sermon. Winter deepened. Storms came, rattling shutters, laying drifts thick against the door. For days they were snowbound, the world outside erased. Inside, the cabin held its own small universe, the hiss of stew bubbling, the scrape of knives against whetstone, the faint hum of Clara's voice when she thought herself alone. One evening, lantern light threw long shadows across the walls. Clara sat by the fire, mending his torn coat. The fabric was coarse, needlework clumsy at first, but her hands grew steady. She hummed a hymn her mother used to sing, the words half forgotten. Elias paused in his sharpening, head tilted slightly. His eyes closed. For a long while he simply listened, his breath slowing, as though the song carried him somewhere he had not dared walk in years. When she fell silent, embarrassed, he spoke. His voice was low, rough with disuse. "My ma used to sing that," he said. She looked at him, across the fire. His face was lit by flame, softened, shadows hollowing his scars into something almost beautiful. "Then you know it better than I," she said gently. He did not answer, but something in the air shifted, tender as thaw. Snow fell outside all through the night. Clara woke to the hush of it, the cabin cocooned in white. She stirred the fire, her breath misting in the chill, and for the first time in weeks, she felt more than survival. She felt belonging. She watched Elias sleep in his chair, his head bent, his chest rising slow and steady. For all his silence, all his rough edges, he had given her what no one else had: space to stand, space to breathe, space to be. Bread, smoke, silence, those had become the language between them. And in that language, something fragile, yet fierce, was taking root. The thaw came late that year. Snow lingered on the ridges like forgotten shrouds, and the creek ran fast with meltwater, loud against the hush of pines. Clara stood outside the cabin, sleeves rolled, wringing laundry against the cold wind. She felt stronger now, the weight in her body different, steadier, as though the wilderness itself had lent her its backbone. Elias was mending a trapline near the tree line when the sound came. Hooves, many of them, carrying voices sharp as axes. Clara froze, the wet cloth slipping from her hands. She knew those voices before she saw the riders. Her kin. And Jedediah Cross. The horses crested the slope, their breath pluming white. Jedediah rode front, hat pulled low, his face pinched with disdain. Her brother flanked him, jaw set like iron. Behind them, two more men she knew, neighbors who once smiled at her table, now carrying rifles across their saddles. Jedediah's eyes swept the cabin, then found her. He smirked, cruel as frostbite. "Well," he said, swinging down from his horse, boots crunching in thawed mud. "You've not died yet. Guess Boone's fire burns hotter than we thought." Clara's throat tightened, but before she could speak, Elias stepped from the trees. He moved without hurry, rifle in hand though not raised, his presence alone filling the clearing like thunder before a storm. Jedediah's gaze flicked to him, lips curling. "You think keeping her makes her yours? She's Dalton blood. And she's mine if I decide it." Elias' silence was heavy, a mountain of it. He did not blink, did not flinch. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. For weeks she had built herself out of ashes and bread and quiet endurance, and now, here they were, ready to strip it all away. She felt shame's old hand clawing at her throat. But another voice stirred, faint but fierce, the voice that had grown here, in snow and firelight, in the hush of Elias Boone's presence. She stepped forward. Her skirts brushed the mud, her hands trembled, but her voice, though thin at first, cut the cold. "No," she said. Jedediah's head snapped toward her. "What?" "No," she repeated, stronger now. "I am not your shame. I am not your burden. And I am not yours." Her brother's mouth opened, closed, rage flaring in his eyes. Jedediah laughed, bitter as rust. "Listen to her. Boone's taught her to bite." Clara's voice shook, but she held her ground. "I chose this fire over your ashes. I chose shelter over your scorn. You left me here to die. I will not crawl back just because you changed your mind." Silence fell, sharp as the crack of ice. Even the horses shifted uneasily, sensing the weight of something turning. Jedediah's sneer deepened. "She's nothing," he spat. That was when Elias spoke. His voice, and used so long, rang out low and steady. "She has my name." The clearing stilled. Clara's breath caught, her knees weak beneath her. Elias' words hung in the air like a church bell tolling across mountains, slow, undeniable, final. Jedediah faltered. "Your name?" Elias' gaze did not waver.
I.
His hand rested on the rifle at his side, not raised but ready. "And that's more than you ever gave her." The men shifted, uncertain now, their bravado leaking away in the face of his quiet certainty. Clara's kin looked at her, as though seeing a stranger. Clara felt the words bloom in her chest. "My name." It was not a possession, not a chain, but a shelter.
A vow.
She had been cast out nameless, yet here, among ashes and silence, she had been given honor. Jedediah muttered a curse, spat in the dirt, and swung back into his saddle. "Keep her, then," he snapped. "She's your ruin now." But his eyes betrayed something else. Fear of a man who needed no shouting to be heard, fear of a woman who would no longer kneel. The riders turned, retreating down the trail. Snowmelt swallowed their hoofbeats until the forest was quiet again. Clara stood trembling, her shawl clutched tight. For a moment she feared her legs might give, but Elias was beside her, steady as stone. He did not touch her, did not speak further, yet his presence was enough. She drew a long breath, the air sharp and clean. For the first time since the wagon had left her here, she did not feel abandoned. She felt chosen. That night, the fire crackled bright. Clara sat mending while Elias sharpened his knife. The storm outside had passed, leaving the world hushed beneath stars. She glanced at him, at the man who had said so few words, yet given her everything. Shelter.
Fire. Dignity.
His name. Their eyes met across the hearth. No declarations were needed. The silence,